He picked up the resignation letter, looked straight at the CEO, and lit it on fire. Right there. In the middle of the boardroom. In front of 40 people. The smoke alarm screamed. Sprinklers exploded from the ceiling. $42 million in contracts. 3 executives in soaked designer suits, and 1 billionaire CEO, sitting perfectly still in her wheelchair, water running down her face, watching a man she had tried to erase prove he was impossible to ignore. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. If this one hits, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because what happened the night before this moment in one hotel room, one shared suite, 2 broken people, that's the story nobody saw coming. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Not 4:45, not 5 o'clock, 4:47. 4. That was the number Caleb James had landed on 3 years ago, after running the math on exactly how many minutes he needed to get everything done before his daughter woke up. Shower, coffee, pack her lunch, lay her clothes on the chair by her door so she didn't have to think in the morning. Check her homework one last time. Then make himself presentable enough to walk into one of the most prestigious marketing firms in Chicago without anyone looking at him twice. He didn't need them to look. He just needed the paycheck. Caleb sat up in the dark and pressed both palms against his face. He held them there for 3 seconds, just 3, and then dropped them. That was his ritual. 3 seconds to feel the weight of everything. Then up. Move. Go. The apartment was quiet in the way only a place holding grief can be quiet. Not peaceful, just still. The walls were covered in Maya's drawings. She called him Daddy the Giant. In every single one, a tall stick figure with broad shoulders standing next to a small one with a cloud of curly hair. There were 17 of them. He had counted once on a night when counting things was the only way to keep himself from falling apart. Lila had loved Maya's drawings. He didn't let himself finish that thought. In the kitchen, he moved fast and silent. He knew every creak in that floor, which boards to avoid, which corner of the linoleum lifted if you stepped wrong. He had mapped this apartment like a soldier maps hostile ground, all to protect 8 hours of sleep for a little girl who deserved every single one of them. He poured his coffee black. No sugar anymore. That was a luxury that had quietly disappeared 18 months ago, when the transmission on the car gave out, and he had to choose between fixing it and covering Maya's after-school program through spring. He kept the program. He always kept what was for Maya. He opened his work bag and rechecked the folder inside for the 4th time since last night. Tabbed sections. Color-coded summaries. The full marketing strategy for the Meridian financial account, 6 months of work, late nights, and 100 small decisions that nobody above him had ever asked about or acknowledged. That folder represented the biggest pitch of Caleb's career. If it landed at the summit in Denver this week, the company would lock in a contract worth $42 million. If it landed. The name on the presentation deck read, Meridian Financial Summit, prepared by the Strategic Marketing Division. Not his name. Never his name. He zipped the bag shut and let out a slow breath through his nose. At 5:30 a.m., he heard the small shuffle of feet in the hallway. A second later, Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her purple blanket like a human burrito. Eyes still half closed, one sock on and one sock off. Daddy! Hey, Bug. He crossed to her immediately, crouching down so they were eye level. You're not supposed to be up yet. I had the dream again. He pulled her in against his chest. He didn't ask which dream. He knew. The one where the house was empty and she couldn't find him. She'd been having it since she was 5, and 3 years of consistency. 3 years of, I'm here, I'm always here, had made it less frequent, but hadn't made it stop. I'm right here, he said. Are you going on the trip? She asked against his shoulder. He had told her about the business summit 3 days ago as gently as he could. 2 nights in Denver. He had arranged for his neighbor, Miss Carroll, a 68-year-old retired teacher with a deeply suspicious number of cats, to stay at the apartment. Maya liked Miss Carroll. Miss Carroll made her breakfast for dinner and let her stay up until 9, watching nature documentaries. 2 nights, he said. That's it. Then I'm back. What if I have the dream when you're gone? Then you call me. I don't care what time it is. She leaned back and looked at him seriously. Maya had her mother's eyes dark and direct, the kind that asked questions before the mouth did. Promise. On every single drawing you put on that wall. That made her smile, just barely. But it was there. He got her settled back in bed with her stuffed elephant and her nightlight on, and then he finished getting ready in a bathroom mirror that had a small crack in the lower left corner he kept meaning to fix. The man looking back at him was 36 years old, though on mornings like this, he could have passed for 42. The suit was pressed, the tie was straight. His eyes were the ones that gave him away that particular shade of tired that doesn't come from one bad night, but from years of sleeping with one ear always open. He straightened the tie one more time. You deserve to be there, he told himself. He didn't entirely believe it, but he was working on it. The office building was 42 floors of glass and ambition rising above the Chicago waterfront, and Caleb moved through the lobby like a man who had learned to be invisible. He said good morning to the security guard, a guy named Pete, who had worked the desk for 11 years and remembered every birthday except his own. Pete always said good morning back. That small exchange was sometimes the warmest human interaction Caleb had before noon. He took the elevator to the 28th floor, walked past the rows of open desks, toward the quieter cluster of offices near the back, where the strategic marketing team sat and settled in with his coffee and his thoughts before the fluorescent lights had fully warmed up. That's when Derek Paulson appeared. Derek was a senior vice president 3 levels above Caleb, and the kind of man who believed that proximity to excellence was the same thing as excellence. He wore suits that cost more than Caleb's monthly rent, and spoke in the declarative tense, even when he was asking questions. He was 45, aggressively confident, and had a talent for attaching his name to things he hadn't built. He dropped into the chair across from Caleb's desk without being invited. Big week, Derek said like he was toasting something. Yes, Caleb agreed carefully. Denver Summit. Meridian pitch. Derek tapped the desk with 2 fingers. I've been looking over the materials. Strong work, Caleb. Really solid fundamentals. Fundamentals. The word landed wrong, and Caleb felt it though he kept his expression neutral. I'll be leading the presentation, of course, Derek continued. You'll be there as support. Answer questions if the client gets into the weeds. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. I built the entire strategy. And it's a great strategy. Derek smiled. This is how these things work. You know that. Caleb knew. He had always known. That was the part that cost him the most, not the surprise of it, but the familiarity. The way it was never framed as theft, just how things work. The presentation goes up under the division name anyway. Derek added, already standing, already done with the conversation. You'll get your moment. Promise. He walked away, and Caleb watched him go. He opened the folder on his desk, ran his thumb along the edge of the tabbed sections. 6 months. 100 decisions. Late nights at the kitchen table after Maya was in bed, laptop open, a cup of cold coffee beside him, building something he believed in. He closed the folder. He kept moving. The flight to Denver left at noon. Caleb had booked his own ticket, coach window seat, no upgrades, and he arrived at the gate carrying his work bag and the small worn duffel he'd had since college. He wasn't thinking about comfort. He was running through the presentation in his head, cross-checking the flow of arguments, anticipating questions the Meridian executives might ask. That's when he heard the quiet authority before he saw the person it came from. No, Thomas, I said, hold the Renault call until I've reviewed the full brief. Not until you think the brief is ready, until I have reviewed it. There's a difference. The voice was measured and precise, not raised, but carrying. It had the quality of a voice that had stopped needing volume to command attention a long time ago. He looked up. She was moving through the terminal in a wheelchair, phone pressed to her ear, a sleek black travel case on her lap, attended by an assistant who walked 2 careful steps behind her. The wheelchair was custom understated, efficient, built for speed. She moved it herself with practiced ease, navigating the crowded gate without slowing down or asking anyone to move. The gate went slightly quiet as she came through. Not from pity, from recognition. Caleb had seen her face in the business section enough times to know it. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Meridian Group, the same Meridian in his folder. The client he had built the entire pitch for without ever once expecting to be in the same terminal as her. She ended her call and glanced once briefly at the gate seating area. Her eyes moved across the space with the practiced economy of someone who had learned long ago to assess a room in seconds. For a fraction of a moment they landed on Caleb. Not recognition, just quick, involuntary measurement. Then she looked away. Caleb looked back down at his folder. He had no idea that in less than 14 hours, he would be the only person in the world who would see her completely fall apart. The hotel in Denver was the kind of place that existed in a different economic atmosphere entirely. Caleb had stayed here once before years ago for a conference. He and Lila had joked about the marble lobby for weeks afterward. He didn't let that memory run very long. He reached the front desk and gave his name. The young woman behind the counter, professional smile name tag that said, Renata typed. Something frowned, typed something else, and then looked up with the expression of someone about to deliver news she would rather not deliver. Mr. James, I am so sorry. There appears to have been an error with your reservation. We're fully booked tonight. The summit has the property at capacity. She glanced at her screen. There is one room available. It's an executive suite. Double occupancy. Double occupancy meaning you'd be sharing with another guest. She paused. It's unconventional, I know, and we'd completely waive the rate difference. Who's the other guest? Renata looked at the screen again. Then she looked at him. He turned around. Victoria Sterling was at the other end of the lobby, wheeling toward the desk with her assistant behind her phone in hand, expression set at a controlled professional neutral that Caleb was beginning to understand was her default armor. She pulled up beside him at the counter without acknowledging him. Sterling, she said to Renata. I have a suite reserved. Yes, Ms. Sterling? Renata's professional composure was doing real work now. There was an error on our end. We're fully committed tonight. Then fix it. We don't have another available room. What we do have is a large executive suite with 2 separate sleeping areas. Ms. Sterling, you'd be in the primary suite, and Mr. James in the attached room with a private bath. We'd fully cover any inconvenience costs. Mr. James, Victoria said, looking at Caleb for the first time directly. That's me, he said. She studied him for precisely 2 seconds. Her gaze was quick and thorough, and entirely without judgment, the way a chess player looks at a board. You're with the Sterling Meridian Summit. Caleb James, Strategic Marketing, Hargrove Associates. He extended a hand. I'm the one presenting your account tomorrow. A pause so brief most people would have missed it. Derek Paulson is presenting the account tomorrow, she said. Derek Paulson is introducing the account tomorrow, Caleb said. He didn't know where that came from. He wasn't given to corrections. But something about the clean precision of her voice and the fact that she was wrong made the words move before he could stop them. Victoria Sterling looked at him for a third second. Then she turned back to Renata. Fine. One night. Get our bags up. The suite was designed for someone accustomed to extraordinary things, and Victoria Sterling moved through it with the ease of a person who had stopped noticing extraordinary things long ago. She was already on a call before her assistant had finished arranging her travel case. Caleb put his duffel on the bed in the attached room and sat for a moment listening to the low professional cadence of her voice through the connecting door, not eavesdropping, just present in the strange reality of this situation. His phone buzzed. Video call, Maya Bug. He answered immediately. Daddy? She was already in her pajamas. Miss Carroll visible in the background, pouring something into a mug. We watched the one about the octopus, the one that changes colors. Did you know they're basically geniuses? I did know that, yeah. Miss Carroll burned the pasta. I did not burn the pasta, Miss Carroll said without looking up. She burned it a little, Maya stage whispered. Caleb laughed an actual laugh, the kind that didn't require performance, and he could feel something in his chest loosen by half an inch. Did you finish the reading? Yes, it was boring. It's always boring, and you always do it anyway. That's practically your superpower. She grinned big and unguarded, and for a moment, the hotel room in Denver disappeared entirely. There was just her face on that screen, and the 16 remaining drawings on that wall he could see over her shoulder. Go brush your teeth, Bug. Will you check on me tomorrow? Before your school starts, I promise. Okay, she hesitated. Daddy, do good tomorrow. I will. Because you're the smartest, she said with the absolute conviction of a child who has decided something and sees no reason to revisit it, even if nobody knows it yet. He held that for a moment after she hung up, even if nobody knows it yet. He set the phone down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. From the other room, the call had ended. The suite was quiet now. Just the low hum of the city outside and the particular silence of two strangers separated by a door, each carrying weight the other couldn't see. He didn't hear her moving for a long time after that. And much later, close to midnight, when he had already turned off his light and was lying in the strange dark of an unfamiliar room, he heard something that made him go completely still. Not words, not a call. A sound so quiet and carefully controlled it was almost nothing. Almost. But Caleb James had spent 3 years listening for sounds in the night. He had trained himself to hear the difference between a sleeping child turning over and a child who was frightened but trying not to show it. He knew the sound of someone trying not to be heard. He sat up, and everything that was supposed to happen tomorrow, the pitch, the boardroom, Derek Paulson and his borrowed ambitions, all of it moved to the far edge of his mind. Because on the other side of that door, the most powerful businesswoman in the room was making the smallest sound in the world. And something in him, the part that had learned to listen before it learned to look away, would not let him pretend he hadn't heard it. He didn't knock right away. He stood at the connecting door for a full 30 seconds, hand raised, not moving. Because he knew something about this moment that most people never learn until it's too late, that some doors, once you open them, don't close the same way again. The sound had stopped. That was almost worse. The silence that replaced it was the kind a person builds deliberately, brick by careful brick, when they realize they've been heard, and they're not ready for that. He knocked anyway. 3 times. Quiet. Nothing. Ms. Sterling. He kept his voice low, the same tone he used at 2 a.m., when Maya had the dream, and he didn't want to startle her. I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear that. I'm not going to make it a thing either. I just want to know if you need anything. Silence. Then, go back to sleep, Mr. James. Her voice was controlled. Almost. There was something underneath it, a thinness like a board that looks solid, but flexes wrong when you step on it. I wasn't asleep, he said. A pause. Then mind your business. I'm trying to, he said honestly. I'm not doing a great job of it. Another silence, longer this time. He was about to step back, give her the space she was clearly demanding, when he heard the slow mechanical sound of her wheelchair moving across the floor. Stopping. Then her voice came through the door at a slightly different angle, closer to the ground. She'd moved toward him, without opening the door. I'm fine, she said, but it came out shorter than she intended, clipped in a way that meant the opposite. Okay, he said. He didn't move. I've got ibuprofen, a protein bar that Maya packed in my bag, that I'm pretty sure is chocolate chip, and absolutely nothing on my schedule until 6 a.m. So, a very long pause. You carry ibuprofen. I carry everything. I'm a single dad. The door opened. She didn't open it wide. Just enough. She was in a plain gray long-sleeve shirt. Now her hair no longer structured the way it had been in the lobby, loose pulled to one side. Without the armor of the blazer and the professional setting, she looked simultaneously younger and more exhausted, like 2 different versions of the same person standing in the same body. She didn't look at him directly. Her jaw was tight. Her left hand was pressed against her lower ribcage in a way that looked habitual, like a gesture she made so often she didn't notice it anymore. "It's a nerve episode," she said, like she was filing a report. "It happens. It'll pass." "How long do they usually run?" 40 minutes. Sometimes longer if I've been traveling. She paused. "I don't need your help." "I know you don't," he said. "You want the ibuprofen or not?" She looked at him then. Directly, fully, the way she had in the lobby, that quick, precise assessment. But this time, there was something behind it that hadn't been there before. Not vulnerability exactly. More like someone standing at the edge of something and doing the math on whether the jump is worth it. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He got the ibuprofen from his bag and brought it to the door with a bottle of water from the nightstand. She took both without ceremony, shook 2 tablets out, swallowed them, and handed the bottle back. "You can go back to your room now," she said. He nodded, didn't move immediately. "Is there anything that helps while you wait for it to pass?" "Distraction," she said before she could stop herself. She said it the way people say true things when their guard is down and they're too tired to redirect quickly, flatly, like stating a weather fact. He looked at her. "I could talk at you for a while. I'm told I'm excellent at filling silence." She almost didn't react. And then, barely one corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. The shadow of one. "That's supposed to be comforting. Honestly, I'm just trying to get you to stop pressing your hand against your ribs like that before I feel responsible." She looked down at her hand. Moved it. Looked back up. "You're very strange for a marketing employee." "I'm very strange for a person," he said. She considered him for another moment. Then she turned her chair slightly and moved back into the suite, leaving the door open behind her. He understood that as an invitation, the way you understand a gesture made by someone who doesn't want to have to explain it. He followed and found a chair near the small sitting area and sat down. She positioned herself a few feet away, her posture still straight, still managed, but with less performance in it than before. "Don't make this weird," she said. "I will do my absolute best," he said. The first 20 minutes were mostly him talking. She had asked, or not asked, really just not told him to stop, so he talked. About the summit preparations, about the presentation materials, about the Meridian account, and the 6 months of groundwork he'd laid in it. He kept it easy and professional, nothing that required her to respond, just sound filling a room where pain was doing its slow, quiet work. She listened. He could tell she actually listened, not the polite, surface-level listening people perform in conference rooms, but the real kind. She asked 2 questions. Both of them sharp. Both of them going directly to the part of his strategy he'd spent the most time wrestling with, as if she'd x-rayed the presentation from his description alone and found the joints. "The brand repositioning pivot in Q3, she said. "You're assuming Meridian's existing customer base will absorb it. That's a significant assumption." "It is," he said. "I spent a month on that specifically. The data from their last 2 retention surveys shows that their core demographic 45-plus family-anchored households actually responds better to repositioning when it's framed as stability rather than growth. The language I used in the deck plays into that." She was quiet for a moment. "I haven't seen that framing in any of the pre-reads Derek's office sent." "No," Caleb said. "You wouldn't have. He sent the executive summary. The actual strategy document is 48 pages. I doubt he read past page 6. She looked at him. "That's a significant thing to say about a senior vice president." "It's a significant amount of work to have summarized into 6 pages, he said. He wasn't angry when he said it. He was just done softening it. Victoria studied him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not offense, not agreement. Something more clinical and more interested. "How long have you been at Hargrove?" 7 years. "Same level for all 7? He met her eyes. "Yes." She didn't say anything, but something shifted in the quality of her silence. He had the feeling she was filing something the way she'd file a number that didn't match the rest of a column. not discarding it, just holding it apart until the right question came along. He shifted in the chair, and something crinkled in his jacket pocket. He reached in and pulled out the protein bar slightly crushed wrapper, decorated with small, hand-drawn stars that had been added with a purple marker. He looked at it for a second. "My daughter packed this," he said. "She draws on everything she gives me. So I know it's from her and not some, quote, random granola bar from the store that doesn't have love in it." He set it on the table between them without offering it. Just let it sit there. Victoria looked at the wrapper, at the small imperfect stars. She didn't reach for it. "How old?" she asked. 8. "She draws on your food. She draws on everything. My work folders, my phone case. Last month she got into my good pen and put a star on the inside of my wrist." He held up his left wrist out of habit, though the mark was long gone. "I kept it for 2 weeks before it finally washed off." Victoria was quiet. Her hand had moved back toward her ribs, not pressing now, just resting near the spot. Something in her face had changed, not softer exactly, more present. "What's her name?" she asked. "Maya." The name landed in the room the way names do when they belong to someone loved, not just a sound, a weight. "She sounds like a lot," Victoria said. "She's everything," he said simply. He didn't mean for the conversation to turn. He wasn't steering it anywhere. But at some point, somewhere after midnight, somewhere between the ibuprofen beginning to work and the city outside going from restless to quiet, Victoria Sterling stopped filing things and started talking. It started small. A comment about the summit. A dry observation about the way Chicago firms performed at Denver altitude, something about the air making men ambitious and imprecise. He laughed. She watched him laugh. Then, "How long has she been without her mother?" He didn't answer right away. Not because it was a bad question, but because the honest answer had different weights depending on how he held it. 3 years, he said. "Car accident. Winter black ice. Maya was 5. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. No performance in it. Just the words flat and direct and real. "Thank you," he said. He meant it. She turned her chair slightly toward the window. He could see her profile now, the way her jaw moved like she was deciding something. Outside, Denver's lights were a dim scatter below the low clouds. "I've been in this chair since I was 29, she said. "Degenerative spinal condition, the kind with a long name that means the same thing every day, that my body is working against itself, and there's no negotiating with it." He didn't say anything. She wasn't done. "I built Sterling Group in this chair. Every meeting, every acquisition, every board presentation. Do you know what people see when a woman in a wheelchair walks into a boardroom?" She turned back from the window. "They see the chair. They do everything in their power to pretend they're not seeing the chair, which means they spend the entire meeting performing their own tolerance instead of listening to what I'm actually saying. And so you make it impossible for them not to listen." She looked at him. "That's what all of it is," he said quietly. Not an accusation. Recognition. The precision, the control, the never a hair out of place. You make the performance so flawless that they eventually stop watching the wheelchair and start watching the CEO. A long silence. "Most people think I'm cold," she said. "I think you got tired of giving people something to feel sorry for." She held that for a moment. Outside, a lone car moved along the street below, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. "It still works," she said finally. "The strategy, mostly." The word mostly came out with a weight that suggested it was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. He watched her, not searching for something to say. Just there. "Tonight's not the first episode," she said. "I have them sometimes after long travel days. My assistant is trained to handle them. I told her to go back to her room because—" She stopped. "Because you didn't want her to see it," he said. "Because I don't need a witness." She said it sharply, then caught herself. Her jaw tightened briefly and released. "I've managed this alone for 7 years. I don't have a protocol for other people." "I know," he said. "I didn't knock because I had a protocol." I knocked because you were quiet in a way that sounded like someone trying not to drown. She looked at him for a long time. Something was happening in her face that she clearly had not planned for and was not entirely sure what to do with. Not weakness. More like a window that had been painted shut for years, slowly giving against the pressure of a warm night. "This doesn't leave this room," she said. "Obviously," he said. "I mean it. I have worked for 20 years to be taken seriously in every room I walk into. One story about a medical episode in a hotel suite, and Ms. Sterling." His voice was patient, final. "I have a daughter who trusts me with every dream she's ever been scared of. You think I don't know how to hold something that belongs to someone else?" The room went quiet. She turned toward the window again. He could see the tension moving out of her shoulders, not quickly, not completely, but moving. A slow exhale she probably didn't even know she was releasing. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone who would pretend not to hear." She paused. Everyone pretends not to hear. He thought about that. About 7 years of watching people pretend. About how exhausting it must be to live at the center of that kind of careful performance, surrounded by people who were either afraid of you, or performing for you, or both. "That sounds incredibly lonely," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He reached over and slid the protein bar, the one with the small purple stars, across the table toward her. "Maya would want you to have this," he said. "She packed it with love in it. Her words." Victoria looked at the bar, at the stars, at him. And very carefully, the way someone handles something they're not entirely sure won't break, she picked it up. She didn't open it, just held it in her lap, fingers curved around the crinkled wrapper. "Tell me more about the Q3 retention data," she said. He almost smiled. "Yeah, I want to understand the full 48 pages, she said, since apparently my SVP only got through 6. So he talked, and she listened. Really listened, the way she had been built to listen when the armor was off and the room was quiet and no one was watching. She asked questions that went to the bone of every argument, challenged 3 of his assumptions, agreed with the rest, and at one point said quietly, almost to herself, "This is genuinely excellent work." He didn't respond to that immediately. "Why hasn't anyone noticed?" she said. "Nobody looks," he said, "until they need something." She went quiet at that, and something moved across her face, the particular expression of a person doing a private accounting of something they don't like the total of. It was almost 2 in the morning before either of them acknowledged the time. The pain had receded. He could tell by the way she was holding herself differently, less managed, less walled. She looked tired now, in an ordinary human way, rather than the controlled exhaustion she'd worn since the lobby. "You should sleep," she said. "So should you." "I will." She glanced down at her lap at the bar still there, then up at him. "Mr. James?" "Caleb," he said. A beat. "Caleb?" His name in her voice, careful and deliberate, like she was deciding what it meant. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he said. He stood, moved to the connecting door, and paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around. "I've been in a lot of rooms with powerful people, and I've never once seen strength that comes from what you actually have to carry, and still show up." He waited a beat. "Good night, Ms. Sterling." He went back to his room and lay down in the dark. And on the other side of the door, for the first time in longer than she could count, Victoria Sterling sat alone in a quiet room and did not feel quite so alone in it. He slept 3 hours. That was enough. It had been enough for 3 years, ever since the night after Lila's funeral, when he realized that sleep was no longer something he fell into naturally, but something he had to negotiate with himself, a transaction, not a rest. 3 hours meant he was functional. 3 hours meant he could stand up straight and look his daughter in the eye on a video call without her seeing the weight behind his. He was dressed by 5:45, folder open on the small desk, running through the presentation for the last time. Not because he didn't know it, he knew every line, every data point, every deliberate word choice. but the act of reviewing it settled something in him. It made the work real in a way that the previous evening's conversation with Derek had tried to unmake. At 6 sharp, his phone buzzed. Maya's face filled the screen, hair still wild from sleep, holding her stuffed elephant by one ear the way she always did in the morning. "Did you do good?" she asked. He smiled. "Presentation's not until this morning, Bug." "I know. I meant, did you do good last night, being a person?" He blinked. "Where did that come from?" "Miss Carroll says that's the real job," Maya said seriously. "Doing good as a person. The other stuff is just stuff." He held that for a second. 68 years old, 3 cats and more wisdom than half the executive floor at Hargrove Associates. "Tell Miss Carroll she's right," he said. "She knows," Maya said. "She says she's always right." He was laughing when the call ended. Genuinely fully laughing, the kind that loosened his chest and reminded him that there was a life on the other side of this day worth returning to. He closed the folder, picked up his bag, and walked out. The suite's main living area was empty. The connecting door was closed. No sound from the other side. He moved quietly toward the hallway, already running the morning timeline in his head. Coffee downstairs, early arrival at the conference room setup before Derek showed up and started performing ownership of everything in sight. He was almost to the door when he heard her voice. "Caleb." He turned. Victoria was in the doorway of the main suite, dressed and composed, the armor back in place. Blazer-sharp posture managed the full professional architecture restored. But she was looking at him differently than she had in the lobby yesterday. Not warmer exactly. More direct. Like the calculation had changed overnight and she was working with new numbers. "The Q3 retention framing," she said. "I want it in the front third of the presentation, not the back. The Meridian board will disengage by the time Derek gets to the data if you bury the strongest argument." Caleb looked at her. "Derek controls the order." "Derek controls what he thinks he controls," she said. "Find a way." She held his gaze for one additional beat, long enough to mean something, and then wheeled back inside. He stood at the door for a second, recalibrating. Then he adjusted the folder under his arm, walked to the elevator, and started figuring out how. The conference room on the 4th floor was already buzzing by 8 a.m. The particular aggressive quiet of people performing confidence at each other before the real thing started. 22 executives from Meridian Financial, 4 from Hargrove, 3 external consultants, and the kind of catered breakfast that existed to remind everyone in the room what tax bracket they were operating in. Derek Paulson arrived at 8:15 in a suit that cost more than Caleb's first car, carrying a leather portfolio he'd had monogrammed, trailing 2 junior associates who moved around him like anxious satellites. He clapped Caleb on the shoulder without looking at him. "Big morning. You ready to back me up on the technical pieces?" "I'll be ready," Caleb said. Derek moved toward the front of the room, already working the handshakes, already turning his face toward the Meridian executives with the particular radiance of a man who has confused being well-liked with being respected. Caleb sat up quietly at the side table. He pulled up the presentation on the laptop, went to the slide deck, and spent 7 minutes restructuring the order. The Q3 retention argument moved from slide 19 to slide 6, repositioned as the strategic foundation rather than the supporting evidence. He saved it under a new file name, sent it to the room's display system. Done. He closed the laptop and stood against the wall with his coffee and waited. At 8:55, the doors opened again. The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the specific way of air pressure changing. The Meridian executives, who had been leaning back in their chairs, came slightly forward. The Hargrove team straightened. Derek turned from the conversation he was having mid-sentence. Victoria Sterling moved through the doorway at a pace that made it clear she was not arriving, she was beginning. Her assistant held the door. She didn't acknowledge the adjustment the room made for her. She moved directly to the head table, positioned herself, set a single leather notebook in front of her, and looked up. The room was fully attentive. "Let's begin," she said. Nobody checked whether everyone was seated. Derek started well. He always started well. The opening 3 minutes of any presentation were where he lived best, all confidence and polish, and the smooth language of a man who had spent a career packaging other people's substance in his own wrapping. He introduced the project history, framed the business context, and transitioned to the deck with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the first chapter while skimming the rest. Then the slides came up. And the order was different. Derek paused barely less than a second, the kind of pause only someone watching for it would catch. He glanced at the screen, glanced at Caleb. The expression on his face moved through confusion and arrived at controlled irritation in the time it took him to draw a breath. He kept going. He was too professional to stop. But the shift threw him, and within 4 minutes of hitting the new structure, he was visibly swimming, answering from the surface of the material rather than the depth, because the depth had always been Caleb's, and he had never actually gone there. A Meridian executive older man, gray suit the look of someone who had not survived 40 years of boardrooms by being polite when things didn't add up, raised his hand. The Q3 projection model. Walk me through the underlying assumption on customer retention. Derek smiled. Great question. The data suggests retention increases by 11% when repositioning language mirrors existing brand equity rather than challenging it, Caleb said from the side of the room. The gray suit executive turned toward him. Derek turned toward him. The entire room turned toward him. Caleb walked it forward from there. Not aggressive, not performing, just clear. He knew every number in the model, every decision behind every number, every alternative he'd considered and discarded, and why. He spoke the way you speak when you built the thing, not reciting thinking. The words had weight because they came from somewhere real. The executive asked 3 more questions. Caleb answered all 3. Another Meridian board member leaned in from the left side of the table, a woman in her 50s who had been quiet until now. Who prepared this analysis? A half-second of silence. Derek opened his mouth. Caleb James did, said Victoria Sterling. The room went still. Not loud still. The specific still of a room where a statement has been made that everyone understands has consequences, and no one is ready to name them yet. Derek turned toward the head table. Something moved across his face, the expression of a man whose narrative has just been publicly restructured, and who has not yet decided whether to argue with it. Caleb is the strategic architect of the Meridian account, Victoria continued. She said it without heat, without drama, the way she announced facts that were not open for interpretation. 7 months of research modeling and brand analysis. What you're seeing in this presentation is his work. The Meridian CEO, who had been sitting at the far end of the table with the particular stillness of a man who doesn't speak until he has something worth saying, looked from Victoria to Caleb. Mr. James, he said, sit down and take us through the rest of it. Caleb had imagined this room 100 times in the previous 7 months. Not the specific room he hadn't known it would be, this room, this table, this particular quality of morning light, but the feeling of standing in front of the work and being the one to own it. He had imagined it the way people imagine things they want so badly, they half convince themselves it's dangerous to want. It was nothing like he'd imagined. It was better, and harder, and realer in a way that imagination always fails to prepare you for. He sat down, pulled the laptop toward him and began. He went through the full analysis, the market positioning, the customer retention, modeling the Q3 pivot strategy, the 18-month implementation roadmap. He answered questions as they came, not waiting for pauses in the presentation, but letting the conversation happen around the material, the way good work invites real conversation. A Meridian executive challenged the competitive analysis on slide 14. Caleb showed him the 3 data sets underneath it and walked through why 2 of them actually strengthened the challenge rather than dismissing it. At one point, he looked up and caught Victoria watching him. Not the way you watch a presentation. The way you watch something you've already decided about checking whether the decision holds. It held. 52 minutes from when he sat down, the Meridian CEO put his pen on the table and said, "This is the strongest strategic brief we've seen on this account in 3 years. The room exhaled. Derek said nothing. He was sitting slightly back from the table, now portfolio closed in front of him, performing the careful, neutral expression of a man managing a very large internal reaction in a room full of people whose opinions matter to him. Caleb didn't look at him. He looked at the work, at the slides, at the numbers he had built out of 7 months of early mornings and late nights in a small Chicago apartment while his daughter slept. He let himself have it, just for a second. Just the quiet recognition that it had always been real, always been worth something. It had just needed the right room to be in. The break after the presentation scattered the room. Coffee refills, handshakes, quiet side conversations that meant the actual decisions were beginning. Caleb was standing near the window, a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, when he felt the shift in the air that preceded Victoria, the way weather systems precede the storm. She pulled up beside him without preamble. "That was precisely what I expected," she said. "From the 48 pages, from last night." She looked at the room, not at him. "You think differently than the people around you. You've been doing it quietly for so long, you've forgotten it's unusual." 7 years of quiet, he said. "That ends today," she said. "Whether you want it to or not." She paused. "The Meridian team wants a follow-up session next week. They'll ask for you by name. Hargrove will have to decide what to do with that." He looked at her. "And Derek. Derek will manage," she said with a precision that made it clear managing was the ceiling of what she expected from Derek, and she had already made her peace with that. "You didn't have to say what you said," Caleb told her. "In there. You didn't owe me that." She was quiet for a moment. He could see something working in her expression, the particular internal negotiation of a person deciding how honest to be in daylight, in a room full of people, with the armor back on. "Last night you told me I'd gotten tired of giving people something to feel sorry for," she said quietly. "You were the first person in 7 years to say that, like it was a reasonable thing, not a compliment, not a criticism, just an observation." She paused. "I owe you more than a sentence in a boardroom." He didn't respond to that. He stood with it, instead the way you stand with something that has more weight than you expected. Across the room, the Meridian CEO was speaking with 2 of his board members, and Caleb could tell from the posture of the conversation, the leaning and the nodding, that something real was moving. The kind of movement that meant a contract, a decision, a door opening where a wall had been. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now the work continues," she said, "and the people who do the work get credited for it." She looked at him, then directly with the full force of that precise attention that had floored 3 boardrooms before noon. "How long has your daughter been drawing stars on things?" The shift in topic caught him off guard. "Since she was 4, he said. "Why?" "Because she packed you a protein bar with love in it," Victoria said. "And you carried it across 2 states and put it on a table in front of me at midnight, like it was the most natural thing in the world." She paused. "That's not nothing, Caleb." He looked at her. There was something in her face now that he hadn't seen in the lobby, or the terminal, or the boardroom. Something quieter and less defended than all of it. Not the CEO. Not the armor. Just the woman who had eaten a protein bar with small purple stars on the wrapper at 2 in the morning, and asked him to keep talking. "No," he agreed. "It's not nothing." Derek reappeared at the edge of his peripheral vision, moving toward them with the recalibrated expression of a man shifting strategy midfield. Caleb saw him coming. So did Victoria. "Victoria," Derek said warmly, using her first name in the way people use first names to assert familiarity they haven't earned. "Hell of a session." Caleb really came through with the technical support. "Mr. Paulson," Victoria said without turning her full attention to him, "I'll be recommending to the Hargrove board that future Meridian communications come directly through Mr. James. You'll be copied." Derek opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Of course," he said. The word came out flat, scrubbed clean of everything it would have meant 20 minutes ago. He walked away. Caleb watched him go. He was waiting to feel something about it. Satisfaction, maybe, or the release of a pressure he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing it. Instead, what he felt was something quieter and more complete. Like a word finally spoken after years of being held in the throat. He turned back to Victoria. She was watching him read the moment that precise evaluative attention that he was beginning to understand was just how she looked at things that interested her, not invasively, but fully the way you give your full attention to something you don't want to get wrong. "You should call your daughter," she said. He looked at his watch. 10:48. Maya would be in school. "She's in class." "Then call anyway. Leave a message." She looked at him. "Tell her you did good." He felt something shift in his chest. Small, significant. "I will," he said. He stepped toward the hallway phone already in hand, already pressing her name. The call went to voicemail. Miss Carroll's phone that Maya used during school hours. The outgoing message recorded by Maya herself. All business. "Hi, this is Maya's phone. She's at school. Being very smart. Leave a message and she'll call back." He laughed softly in the empty hallway. "Hey, Bug," he said after the beep. "I just wanted you to know I did good. As a person. Tell Miss Carroll she was right." He paused. "Love you. I'll be home tomorrow." He hung up and stood in the quiet hallway for a moment. The sounds of the conference room drifted under the door, professional voices, the shift of chairs, the particular music of a room doing real business. He had built that. And for the first time in 7 years, the right people knew it. He straightened his tie, put the phone in his pocket, and walked back into the room. The flight back to Chicago left at 4:15. Caleb was at the gate an hour early. Not because he was anxious, he had stopped being anxious about flights somewhere in the second year of solo parenting, when anxiety became a luxury he couldn't afford. But because sitting in the terminal with a cup of coffee, and nothing required of him for 45 minutes, was the closest thing to vacation he was likely to get this month. He had called Maya twice already. She had answered the second time, still in her coat from school, breathless, talking so fast about the octopus documentary, and a spelling test she'd gotten a 94 on, and a fight between 2 kids at recess that he had to ask her to slow down 3 separate times. He didn't actually ask her to slow down. He just listened and let her run, and felt the specific relief of hearing his daughter's voice filling up all the available space in his ear. When she finally paused for air, she said, "Did you really do good?" "I really did," he said. "Like actually good, or dad good, where you're trying to make me feel better. Good. Actually good. Maya." A pause. Then, in a different voice, quieter, more serious, the one she used when she was being real, rather than performing being 8. "I knew you would, Daddy." He had held the phone against his ear for a long moment after she hung up, sitting in a vinyl airport chair in Denver, eyes forward, not moving. He was still sitting at that gate when he heard the particular sound of a wheelchair moving at a purposeful speed across a terminal floor. The quiet authority of it recognizable now, in a way it hadn't been 24 hours ago. Victoria came to a stop 2 chairs down from him. Her assistant was somewhere behind her managing luggage. She had her phone in her hand, but wasn't looking at it. "Same flight," he said. "Apparently," she said. She didn't move to a different section of the gate. She settled where she was set, her phone face down on her leg, and looked at the departure board. For a few minutes they sat in companionable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have already said the hard things and don't need to fill the space where the hard things used to be. "The Meridian CEO called my direct line 20 minutes ago," she said. "What did he say?" "That he wants the implementation phase to begin in 30 days. She paused. "He also said, and I'm quoting directly, that he hadn't seen a strategic brief that clear since 2019, and he wanted to make sure the person who built it was appropriately positioned at Hargrove going forward." Caleb looked at her. "What did you say?" "I told him I would personally ensure it." She glanced at him sideways. "I hope that's all right." "I don't know what that means yet," he said honestly. "It means Derek Paulson's involvement in your career trajectory is over," she said. "What comes after that is up to you." He thought about that. 7 years of being passed over, talked over, summarized, and sidelined. And then one night, one room, one protein bar with purple stars and the geometry of everything had quietly shifted. Why? He asked. Not ungratefully, genuinely. She looked at him for a moment. Because I've spent 20 years making sure the right work gets credited to the right people in every room except the ones I didn't know to look in. She paused. I wasn't looking in your room, Caleb. I should have been. He didn't argue with that. He just took it in the way you take in something that costs another person something to say. Their flight boarded 11 minutes later. Chicago received them the way Chicago always does in late autumn, with cold, flat conviction, like a city that has decided it has nothing to prove to anyone, and the weather is just part of the terms. Caleb came through the arrivals door and felt the air hit him, and felt underneath the cold the specific relief of being in the city where his daughter slept. He was in a cab heading north when his phone buzzed. Not Maya, not Miss Carroll. Richard Hargrove, his CEO. Caleb stared at the name for a full ring before answering. Caleb. Richard Hargrove was 63 years old, had founded the firm at 31, and spoke in the measured cadences of a man who had learned that most conversations had already been decided before they started. I hear Denver went well. The client was satisfied, Caleb said. Victoria Sterling called me, Richard said. This afternoon. Personal call, which means she wanted me to understand it wasn't a formality. A pause. She told me some things about the Meridian account I should have known before today. Caleb said nothing. I'm not going to make this a long conversation, Richard said. I wanted you to hear it directly from me before you come in tomorrow. Derek is being moved laterally. His involvement with the Meridian account is done. I want you in my office at 9 a.m. to talk about what comes next. Caleb watched the city move past the cab window. The lights, the familiar streets, the particular way Chicago looked at night from a moving car, like something that had been going on without you and was simply continuing, vast and indifferent and entirely real. 9 a.m., Caleb said. And Caleb. Richard paused in a way that meant he was choosing the next words carefully. 7 years is a long time. I should have been paying better attention. I'm sorry for that. The apology sat in the cab with Caleb after the call ended. He didn't know what to do with it yet. It was real, he could hear that much, and it would matter probably in the days ahead when the practical shape of what came next started becoming clear. But right now, it was just a sentence he'd been waiting 7 years to hear from the right person, and the hearing of it was stranger than he'd expected. Not triumphant, not relieved, just true. He put his phone in his pocket and watched the rest of the city go by. Miss Carroll was asleep in the armchair when he came in, a cat on her lap. Another on the back of the chair, a nature documentary playing on mute on the television. She woke the instant the door opened, the way experienced babysitters wake completely and without confusion. She went down easy, Miss Carroll said, extracting herself from the cats with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been doing it for years. Reed for 40 minutes asked me 4 questions about the ocean and was asleep by 8:45. Thank you, Caleb said. He meant the full weight of it, not just the 2 nights. Miss Carroll paused at the door on her way out, looked at him with the direct appraisal of a woman who had lived long enough to read a person's posture like a text. You look different, she said. Different how? Like something stopped pressing on you. She considered him for another moment. It's a good look. She patted his arm once and left. He stood in the quiet apartment for a moment. Maya's drawings on the wall, the worn edge of the couch armrest, the small nightlight visible under her door casting its familiar yellow line across the hallway floor. He went to her door and opened it slowly. She was asleep on her side, one arm around the stuffed elephant. Her hair spread across the pillow in the magnificent chaos it always achieved by nighttime. He stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. He did this sometimes when he came home late, just stood and watched her breathe, not for any specific reason, except that it was the most settling thing in the world. He was about to pull the door back when she stirred. "Daddy? Hey, Bug? I'm home. Go back to sleep." She was already sitting up, squinting against the hallway light. "You're actually home." "I said I would be." "I know, but—" She made a small gesture he understood immediately. He came in and sat on the edge of her bed, and she leaned into his side, still mostly asleep, heavy and warm. "Did you do the big thing?" she asked. "I did the big thing." "Was it scary?" He thought about the boardroom, about Victoria saying his name in front of 22 Meridian executives, about Derek's face and Richard Hargrove's phone call, and the specific moment when he had sat down at that table and started speaking and felt his work filling the room the way it always should have. "Yeah," he said. "It was scary." "But you did it anyway." "Yeah, I did it anyway." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Miss Carroll burned the pasta again." He laughed quietly into the top of her head. "I'll talk to her." "I ate it," Maya said. "It wasn't that bad. Just kind of crunchy." He held her until she went back to sleep. Then he sat for another few minutes in the dark, after just present in the room with his daughter's steady breathing, and the nightlight and the drawings on the wall, and the life he had built out of grief and stubbornness and love. 3 weeks passed. The Meridian contract was signed on a Tuesday morning. $42 million, 18-month implementation. A scope of work that bore Caleb's fingerprints on every page. Richard Hargrove called a firm-wide meeting to announce it, and used Caleb's name 4 times in 10 minutes, which was 4 more times than the previous 7 years combined. His title changed. His office changed. His salary changed in a way that meant Maya's after-school program was no longer a mathematical trade-off against car repairs, and the crack in the bathroom mirror could finally be fixed, and he could order coffee with sugar again if he wanted to. He didn't notice any of it as much as he expected to. What he noticed was the phone call he got from Victoria Sterling on the Thursday after the signing. Not a business call, not about Meridian. She called at 7:15 in the evening, which meant she had thought about the time difference between the professional day and the personal one, and had chosen to call after the professional day ended. "How's Maya?" she asked before anything else. "Obsessed with cephalopods," he said. "We're on the 3rd octopus documentary this week. I know things about octopus cognition that no marketing professional should know." A sound from the other end that he had heard once before, the shadow of a smile. "She sounds relentless." "She is entirely relentless," he said. "It's her best quality." A pause. Then, "I'm in Chicago next week. There's a board meeting Wednesday dinner after." Another pause, shorter, more careful. "I thought if Maya wanted to meet someone who thinks octopuses are also fairly extraordinary, I might be persuadable into a prior engagement." He held the phone. There was something happening in this moment that he wanted to handle right. Not quickly, not with performance, but right. Victoria Sterling did not make casual offers. He had spent enough time in her presence to understand that every word she chose had been chosen, and the choosing of this one of prior engagement of if Maya wanted had cost something. "She would love that," he said. "Good," Victoria said, quickly, like she'd been holding the word. Victoria. He used her name the way she had used his that first night, carefully, like deciding what it meant. "Thank you for calling." A beat. "Don't make it weird," she said. He smiled. "I will do my absolute best." She came on a Thursday evening, which was not the Wednesday she had mentioned, and Caleb had the feeling the change in day had involved some private recalibration on her end that he was wise enough not to ask about. She arrived at the apartment building and a car came up in the elevator and knocked with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had decided not to give herself time to talk herself out of it. Maya answered the door. She had been informed there would be a guest. She had not been informed of the wheelchair, and Caleb had made the deliberate choice not to mention it. Not because it was a secret, but because Maya had grown up in a world where the chair was the first thing adults prepared children for, and he had always believed she didn't need that kind of preparation. She needed exactly what she always needed to see a person and respond to the person. Maya looked at Victoria. looked at the wheelchair, looked back at Victoria's face. "Are you the CEO?" she asked. "I am," Victoria said. "Daddy said you're very important." "Your daddy is very kind. He said you were a little scary too." Caleb from somewhere behind his daughter closed his eyes briefly. Victoria looked past Maya to where Caleb was standing with an expression of restrained alarm. Then she looked back at Maya with something in her face that had not been there in any boardroom or airport terminal or hotel suite, something open and slightly unguarded and genuinely amused. "He's not wrong," Victoria said. Maya stepped back to let her in with the easy acceptance of a child who has already made up her mind. Dinner was pasta, not burned. Caleb had made it himself, and the conversation at the table ran from octopus cognition to wheelchair mechanics, to a detailed account of the recess incident Maya had mentioned on the phone, which turned out to involve a disputed handball call and a level of interpersonal complexity that Victoria listened to with complete seriousness and zero condescension, asking two clarifying questions that made Maya look at her like she had just done something impressive. "What would you have done?" Maya asked her. "If it was you," Victoria thought about it genuinely. "I would have asked for the decision to be reviewed," she said. "Not because the original call was necessarily wrong, but because the process of reviewing it sends a message that decisions can be questioned. That's worth more than winning the point." Maya absorbed this. "That's kind of what I did," she said. "Except I didn't say all those words. I just said it wasn't fair, and Mr. Thompson should look at it again." "Effective," Victoria said. "He didn't look at it again." "Also effective. Now you know something about Mr. Thompson." Maya thought about that for a second, then nodded slowly, satisfied, and went back to her pasta with the air of a person who has received useful information. Caleb watched the two of them from across the table and felt something he hadn't felt in this apartment in a very long time. He couldn't have named it precisely. It was too quiet for happiness and too warm for relief. Something in between in the register of things that are so simply good that they catch you off guard because you'd stopped expecting them. After dinner, Maya showed Victoria the drawings. All 17 of them. She stood in the hallway and narrated each one with the authority of a curator, walking someone through a collection, explaining the artistic choices and the stories behind them, with complete seriousness. Victoria looked at each one. Actually looked, not politely glanced. She asked about the one where Caleb was depicted in what appeared to be a cape. "That's when he carried me on his back for 6 blocks because I hurt my foot," Maya said. "I gave him the cape because he earned it." "He did," Victoria said. She glanced at Caleb. Something moved across her face, brief reel, the kind of expression people wear when something they've been trying not to feel finds them anyway. Later, when Maya was in bed and the apartment had settled into its late evening quiet, Victoria and Caleb sat in the small living room. Not close, not far, just in the same room in the easy way of people who have already survived the difficult version of each other. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "I know," he said. "I can't take much credit for it. She came that way." "You take more credit than you think," she said. "You can see it in how she moves through a room. She's not afraid of anything. You made that." He looked at his hands for a moment. "Lila made a lot of it," he said. Victoria let that sit without rushing past it. That was something he'd noticed about her. She didn't rush past the names of the dead, the way most people did, the anxious social reflex to move on before the grief could become uncomfortable. She just let it be there, which was more generous than most people knew how to be. "Tell me about her," Victoria said. So he did. He talked about Lila the way he rarely let himself talk about her. Not the grief of losing her, but the fact of having had her, which was a different thing entirely, and one he protected more carefully because it was more valuable. He talked about how she laughed, about how she had been relentlessly cheerfully stubborn about things that mattered, and completely unbothered about things that didn't. About how she had known somehow, from the time Maya was 3 weeks old, exactly what kind of person their daughter was going to be. Victoria listened, all of it, without filling the silences. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, She sounds like someone who understood what actually mattered. She did, he said. She was better at it than me. I'm still learning. You're doing fine, Victoria said. It was direct and without sentiment, which made it feel true, in a way that softer versions wouldn't have. He looked at her. She was looking at the drawings on the wall, at the one with the cape specifically, and he could see it in her profile, the thing she had told him about at 2 a.m. in a Denver hotel room, the belief she had carried so long, it had calcified into something she stopped questioning. That nobody could truly love a woman in that chair. That the armor was permanent because it had to be. That the loneliness was the price of the strength, and the strength was non-negotiable. He could see her almost believing something different. Not quite. Not yet. But almost. Victoria, he said. She looked at him. You're allowed to be here, he said. Not as a CEO. Not as anything with a title. Just here. In this apartment. With this ridiculous amount of octopus knowledge and a kid who already thinks you're exceptional, and a guy who owes you more than a thank you. He paused. You don't have to earn that. It's just true. She held his gaze for a long time, long enough that he could see the work happening behind her eyes, the old argument she'd been having with herself for years, meeting something new and not knowing which one to trust. Then Maya's voice came down the hallway, sleepy and matter-of-fact. Dad, is Victoria still here? Yeah, Bug. Good. A pause. If my dad takes care of me, who takes care of you? The question landed in the living room like something dropped from a height. Small. Enormous. Caleb looked at Victoria. She was completely still. All the armor, all the precision, all the 20 years of control still. Just a woman in a living room in Chicago holding a question from an 8-year-old like it was the first thing in years that had gotten all the way in. Her eyes were bright. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because some questions aren't asked to be answered. They're asked to open a door that has been closed too long. And in the silence that followed in that small apartment with 17 drawings on the wall and a nightlight burning at the end of the hall, something that had been shut for a very long time came quietly, carefully open. Nobody answered Maya's question that night. Not out loud. Not with words. Victoria sat with it, the way you sit with something that has reached all the way through every layer of defense you've spent years constructing and touched something you forgot was still alive in there. She didn't cry. She wasn't a woman who cried easily. And even if she had been, she wouldn't have done it in a stranger's living room with a child's voice still hanging in the air. But her hands, which were always controlled, always precisely where she intended them to be, moved to her lap and stayed there very still, like she was holding something fragile she hadn't known she was carrying. Caleb didn't push. He had learned in 3 years of raising a daughter who felt everything loudly and needed space for it, that the most important thing you could do for a person in a moment like this was simply not leave. So he stayed where he was, and she stayed where she was, and after a while she said quietly, I should go. Okay, he said. He walked her to the door. She stopped in the hallway and looked at the drawings one more time, all 17 of them, the whole arc of Maya's artistic vision covering the wall like a small and certain universe. She looked at the one with the cape for a long time. Thank you for dinner, she said. Thank you for coming. She started to turn, then stopped. She didn't look at him when she said it. She said it to the wall, to the drawings, to the space in the room that was safer than his face. I don't know how to do this, she said. Whatever this is, I don't have a framework for it. Neither do I, he said. I haven't had a framework since 2021. She turned then, looked at him. Doesn't that terrify you? Every single day, he said. I do it anyway. She held that. He could see her filing it the way she filed everything, not dismissing it, just finding the right place for it, the right weight. Good night, Caleb, she said. Good night, Victoria. She went down the hallway. He stood at the door until he heard the elevator arrive and then close, and then he went back inside and stood in the living room with the drawings and the nightlight and the quiet that was not empty anymore in the way it used to be. He touched the corner of the drawing with the cape, just once. Then he went to bed. Phew. November became December. The Meridian implementation began on schedule, and Caleb's name was on every document that mattered. He had a team now, 3 people reporting to him, a real office, with a window, a calendar that reflected the actual scope of his work, instead of the diminished version of it that had passed for 7 years. He was good at it in a way that surprised even him. Not the strategy part, he'd always known he was good at that, but the leading part. The being seen part. The walking into a room and taking up the space he actually occupied without apologizing for the edges of it. Derek Paulson had been moved to a regional accounts division in the suburbs. He sent Caleb a brief, carefully worded email in the first week of November that said, "Congratulations on the new role," and contained nothing that could be quoted against him. Caleb wrote back 3 sentences, all professional, all genuinely meant. He didn't need anything more from Derek. He didn't need anything from Derek at all. Victoria called on a Tuesday, then a Thursday, then the following Monday. The calls were never announced as personal. They always started with something adjacent to business. A Meridian update. A question about the implementation timeline. A thought she'd had about the Q3 projections. And then at some point, usually around the 10-minute mark, they became something else. She would ask about Maya. He would ask about her week. She would tell him something dry and precise about a board meeting that made him laugh in the way she was clearly starting to aim for the small, deliberate precision with which she deployed a dry observation, like placing a chess piece. He started recognizing when she was doing it, and she started recognizing that he recognized it, and that mutual recognition became its own kind of language. Maya, who was 8 years old and missed nothing, said on a Wednesday evening while eating cereal before school, "Is Victoria your girlfriend?" Caleb looked at his coffee. "We're friends," he said. "You smile different when she calls." "I smile the same way I always smile." Maya gave him the look she had inherited directly from Lila, the one that said, "I am going to allow you this fiction because I respect you, but we both know," and went back to her cereal. He finished his coffee and did not look at his phone. December brought the first snowfall on a Friday, the soft early kind that makes Chicago briefly beautiful before it becomes a logistical problem. Maya stood at the window for a full 10 minutes with her hands pressed to the glass, absolutely still, watching it come down. "Can we call Victoria?" she asked. Caleb looked up from the papers on the kitchen table. "What? I want to show her the snow." Maya turned from the window with perfect seriousness. "She lives in a high-rise, right? She can probably see it too. But seeing it together is different." He looked at his daughter for a moment. At the complete, uncomplicated logic of her, the way she moved toward the people she liked without strategy, without self-protection, without the 47 calculations adults ran before they let themselves want something. "Yeah," he said. "She probably can see it," he called. Victoria answered on the second ring, which she didn't always do. "It's snowing," Maya announced, having already crossed the room and inserted herself into the call. A pause. "I can see it from my window," Victoria said. "Are you watching it?" "I wasn't," Victoria said. "I am now." Maya put the phone against the window glass, as if Victoria could see through it, which she couldn't. But the gesture satisfied something in Maya's internal logic, and she held it there for a full 30 seconds in total sincerity. "Did you see it?" Maya asked. "I saw my window," Victoria said, "and I imagine yours looks very similar." "It does," Maya confirmed. She handed the phone back to Caleb and returned to the window, her mission accomplished. Caleb held the phone to his ear. On the other end, he could hear the quality of her silence, the particular variety of it he had learned to read, the one that meant she was smiling and had no intention of confirming it. "She thought you should see the snow," he said. "I gathered." A pause. "She's remarkable. She's relentless is what she is." "Those are the same thing," Victoria said. He stood at the kitchen table, with the snow coming down outside, and his daughter's breath fogging the window, and the voice on the phone that had become over weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays and occasional Mondays, the last voice he heard before he went to sleep on more nights than he'd admitted to himself yet. "Come see it in person," he said. It came out before he'd decided to say it, which was how he'd started to understand were the truest things he said. A silence. Not the hesitating kind. The kind that meant she was taking it seriously. "The roads will be bad," she said. "I have coffee," he said. Another silence. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, she said. She was there in 35. It was that evening, Maya asleep, snow still falling soft and steady outside the three of them, having eaten grilled cheese sandwiches, because Maya had insisted they were the appropriate food for a first snow night, that things became clear, in the way things become clear not through decisions, but through an accumulation of small, true moments that eventually reach a weight you can't ignore. They were sitting in the living room, and Victoria was looking at the drawings again. She always looked at the drawings Caleb had noticed, the way people return to things that make them feel something they can't quite name. "There are 18 now," he said. She looked closer. She found the new one smaller than the others tucked between the Cape drawing and one of Maya and Caleb at the park. This one had 3 figures. 2 tall, 1 small. The small one was in the middle, curly hair stuffed elephant under one arm. One of the tall figures had broad shoulders. The other was in a wheelchair. Above it, in Maya's careful 8-year-old handwriting, "My family." Victoria was very still. "She put it up 2 days ago," Caleb said. "She didn't ask me. She just did it." A long quiet. "Caleb." Her voice was different, lower, the professional architecture entirely gone. "Yeah, I've been afraid," she said. "For a very long time. Not of you, of—" She stopped, started again. "I built everything I have because I convinced myself it was enough. That the company was enough, the success was enough, that I didn't need—" She stopped again, her hands in her lap. "I told myself that nobody could want this, the chair, the episodes, the medical calendar, the whole impossible complicated. Victoria." His voice was steady. "I spent a night watching you hold a protein bar with purple stars on it, like it was the most careful thing anyone had ever handed you." He paused. "I was already gone then." She looked at him. Really looked the way she'd looked at him in the boardroom and the terminal and the hotel doorway. But without the calculation this time, without the assessment, just looking. "This is terrifying," she said. "I know," he said. "Do it anyway." And she did. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in the stories people tell about falling in love, the grand gesture, the music-worthy moment. Just a woman who had been armored for 20 years, letting someone close enough to see that the armor was not her, choosing quietly not to put it back on. He reached over and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held on. Outside, the snow kept falling. January, February. The Chicago winter moved through its usual rhythms of cold and relentlessness, and in a third-floor apartment on the north side, a new kind of rhythm was establishing itself. Victoria came for dinner on Thursdays, sometimes Sundays. She and Maya had started a running debate about which cephalopod was the most intelligent. Victoria maintained the cuttlefish was underrated. Maya was an unwavering octopus advocate, and Caleb stayed carefully neutral because he valued his peace. She brought work sometimes and sat at the kitchen table while Caleb made dinner and Maya did homework, and the 3 of them occupied the same space in the easy way of people who have stopped performing comfort and started actually feeling it. There were hard nights, too. The episodes came less frequently than before, but still real, and on those nights, Caleb now had a protocol, not one she had handed him, but one they had built together, the way you build things with someone when you stop pretending you don't need to. He knew which medication, which position helped, when to stay close, and when to give her room, when she wanted silence, and when she wanted him to talk about anything at all, until the pain receded. She let him. That was the part that had taken the longest. Not the trusting him. She had trusted him almost from the night in Denver, even when she hadn't called it that. But the letting him help. The choosing not to send him back to his room. The understanding that being taken care of was not the same thing as being diminished, and that a man who stayed was not pitying her, he was seeing her. One evening in February, Maya was doing her homework at the kitchen table, and Victoria was reading a brief on her tablet, and Caleb was washing dishes. And Maya looked up from her work and said, as if continuing a conversation that had been happening in her head, "Miss Carroll says that a family is whoever shows up." Victoria lowered her tablet. "Miss Carroll says a lot of true things," Caleb said from the sink. "She says you two are the showing up kind," Maya said. She looked at Victoria directly. No self-consciousness, no performance. "Are you staying?" Victoria looked at the girl, at the homework spread across the table and the stuffed elephant on the chair beside her, and the wall of drawings that now included one with 3 figures and the word family written above them. "Yes," Victoria said. "I'm staying." Maya nodded satisfied and went back to her homework. It was exactly the right answer. It was not complicated. It did not require a framework. In March, the Meridian contract entered its second phase, and Caleb presented the phase review to a room of 20 executives and said everything that needed to be said without checking to see if anyone was going to let him. His name was on the work. It had always been on the work. The difference now was that he knew it not with the fragile knowing of someone who needs the room to confirm it, but with the steady knowing of a man who had stopped waiting for permission to be what he already was. Richard Hargrove shook his hand after the presentation and said, "I want to talk about your trajectory long term." "I know," Caleb said. "I have some thoughts." He did. He had been having them for months. The clarity that comes when you stop organizing your life around what other people decide about you is a particular kind of clarity, wide and clean, like a window that's been washed for the first time in years. That afternoon, he left work early, something he had stopped apologizing for. Maya had a school thing, a small assembly where she was receiving a reading award, and it started at 3:15, and there was not a version of his life in which he wasn't in that auditorium at 3:15. He arrived to find Miss Carroll already seated in the 3rd row with the aggressive preparedness of a woman who had been showing up for other people's children for 4 decades. She had saved him a seat. "She's nervous," Miss Carroll said. "She's never nervous." "She's nervous today." Miss Carroll gave him a look. "She wants you to see." He understood that. The specific want of a child who has done something real and needs the person who matters most to be in the room for it. He had spent 3 years being in every room that mattered for Maya, and he would spend the next 30 in the same rooms and every one after that, because that was the thing he had known how to do, even when he hadn't known anything else. Victoria arrived at 3:12. He turned when he heard the doors, and there she was moving down the aisle of a school auditorium in her chair. In her work clothes phone, presumably ringing somewhere, she was ignoring it, locating him in the 3rd row and moving toward him with the direct efficiency of a woman who has decided where she is going and sees no reason to negotiate with the distance. She settled beside him. Miss Carroll looked at her, then at Caleb, then back at her with the expression of a woman who has seen enough of life to recognize when something is right. "You must be Victoria," Miss Carroll said. "I must be," Victoria said. "She talks about you," Miss Carroll said with the frank warmth of someone who considers this a significant endorsement. "Maya, she talks about you the way she talks about important things." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She's 8 years old and already the most interesting person I know," she said. "That seems worth showing up for." Miss Carroll made a sound of agreement and approval that required no further elaboration. The lights went down. The principal said some things, and then Maya walked out onto the stage in her good sweater. The one with the small embroidered stars at the collar, she had picked it herself, of course, and stood at the microphone with the posture of a person who is nervous and has decided that being nervous is not the same thing as being stopped. She found them in the 3rd row. Her face in the stage light went from tight to open in the time it took her to confirm that they were all there. Caleb, Victoria, Miss Carroll. The 3 people who constituted the whole world. She needed to see her. She stood a little taller. She said her piece clear and steady and true, the way she did everything, and when she was done, she looked back at the 3rd row, and Caleb put his hand over his heart, and Maya grinned with the full, unguarded radiance of a child who knows she is loved. Victoria was watching the girl on the stage. Her hands were in her lap, relaxed, the way they only were in a small number of places now. And on her face was an expression he had never seen in a boardroom, or a hotel suite, or a terminal. Not control, not assessment, not the careful architecture of a woman managing how she is perceived. Just this, just here, just the uncomplicated fact of a woman who had spent 20 years building walls, finding herself on a Thursday afternoon in a school auditorium, glad that one of them had finally come down. He reached over and took her hand. She held on. On the stage, Maya accepted her award and looked back at them one more time. And what she saw was exactly what she had drawn on that wall. 3 figures of family, the people who showed up. That was the whole truth of it. Not the contract. Not the title. Not the $42 million, or the headlines, or the boardroom where Caleb had finally been seen, or the night in Denver where 2 people had found each other in the dark. Just this. A father who had never stopped putting others first. A woman who had finally let someone close enough to matter, and a little girl who had known all along what family looked like, because she had drawn it on the wall before it was real, and then watched with complete patience and complete faith, while the world caught up to what she already knew. Real strength doesn't announce itself, it just stays.